The distant whistle of a train echoed across the dusty plains of New Mexico Territory as Rebecca Dalton sat beside the tracks, her shoulders shaking with each sob that escaped her lips. The summer of 1883 was unforgiving, the August heat pressing down on her like a blanket as she clutched a crumpled letter in her trembling hands. Her carefully packed trunk sat beside her, the once pristine white gloves she wore now stained with dirt and tears. She had traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met, only to find another letter waiting for her at the Santa Fe station. Her intended husband had married another just 2 weeks prior. The sound of boots crunching on gravel made her hastily wipe her tears, though she didn't look up. Pride was about all she had left. "Madam," the voice was deep, gentle, "train's gone, won't be another until Thursday." Rebecca kept her eyes fixed on the dusty ground. "I'm aware, sir, thank you." A shadow fell over her as the man stepped closer. "You waiting for someone?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "No, not anymore." She finally looked up, squinting against the sun to see a tall figure silhouetted against the bright sky. He wore a well-worn Stetson, and as he shifted to block the sun from her eyes, she could see his face weathered by the elements but kind, with eyes that reminded her of the clear Texas sky she'd passed through on her journey. He crouched down, bringing himself to her level, and Rebecca noticed the star pinned to his vest. "A lawman. Sheriff Adam Quinn," he introduced himself, offering a calloused hand. "And you look like you could use some help." Rebecca hesitated before placing her gloved hand in his. "Rebecca Dalton." "I—" Her voice broke as fresh tears threatened. Sheriff Quinn's gaze fell to the letter in her other hand, understanding dawning in his eyes. He'd seen this before mail-order brides left stranded when their intended husbands had a change of heart, or worse, had never intended to marry them at all. In one smooth motion, he stood and gently pulled her to her feet. "No more waiting, Miss Dalton. This town might not be what you came for, but it's got more to offer than sitting by these tracks." Rebecca looked up at him, surprised by the conviction in his voice. "I have nowhere to go." "That's where you're wrong," he smiled, a gentle thing that softened his rugged features. "Santa Fe takes care of its own, even the ones who just arrived. Let's get you settled and we can figure the rest out tomorrow." He picked up her trunk with ease, and Rebecca found herself following him away from the tracks, away from the remnants of a dream that had died before it had ever really begun. The walk into town was short, but gave Rebecca time to compose herself. Sheriff Quinn remained respectfully quiet, occasionally pointing out landmarks as they made their way down the main street. "Mrs. Peterson runs the boarding house," he explained as they approached a well-maintained 2-story building with a wrap-around porch. "Best biscuits in the territory and fair prices. She'll look after you until you get your bearings." Rebecca shook her head. "Sheriff Quinn, I appreciate your kindness, but I have limited funds. I spent most of what I had on the train ticket here." He nodded, understanding. "The town has a fund for situations like this. Pastor Thompson started it after." He trailed off, then continued with determination. "Well, you're not the first to arrive to find circumstances changed. We can discuss work tomorrow if that's what you want." Before she could respond, a plump woman with silver-streaked hair bustled out onto the porch. "Adam Quinn, is that you lurking about my property?" she called, her stern tone belied by the smile on her face. Her eyes shifted to Rebecca, taking in her travel-worn appearance and tear-stained cheeks. Understanding immediately, she clucked her tongue. "Oh dear, another one, is it?" Sheriff Quinn nodded slightly. "Mrs. Peterson, this is Miss Rebecca Dalton. She's in need of lodging." The older woman descended the steps, already taking Rebecca's arm. "Of course she is. Come in, dear. We'll get you settled with a hot bath and some supper. You look dead on your feet." Rebecca found herself ushered inside, the sheriff following with her trunk. The interior of the boarding house was clean and homey, with polished wooden floors and simple but comfortable furnishings. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson," Rebecca said, her voice small. "But I should tell you that I can't pay much." Mrs. Peterson waved a dismissive hand. "Sheriff Quinn and I have an arrangement for these situations. You just worry about resting now." She shot the sheriff a meaningful look. "I assume you'll be by tomorrow to discuss matters," he nodded, setting Rebecca's trunk down in the entryway. "First thing, Miss Dalton, I'll call on you after breakfast, if that's acceptable." Rebecca's upbringing as a proper Boston lady warred with her current circumstances. Propriety dictated she refuse his help, but necessity demanded she accept it. "That would be fine, Sheriff, and thank you." After he departed, Mrs. Peterson showed Rebecca to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Bathrooms down the hall. I'll have hot water brought up for you. Supper's at 6 sharp." Left alone, Rebecca sank onto the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to fully comprehend her situation. She was alone in a frontier town, nearly penniless, with no prospects and no way to return home, not that there was much to return to. Her parents were both gone, the family home sold to pay debts, and her position as a teacher's assistant had been filled in her absence. She pulled out the letter from her pocket and read it again, though she'd already memorized the cruel words. "Miss Dalton, I regret to inform you that circumstances have changed since our correspondence. I have married another and will not be meeting you as arranged. I enclose $10 for your trouble." Edward Vance $10, as if that could compensate for uprooting her entire life. Rebecca tore the letter to pieces, then buried her face in her hands and allowed herself one final cry before squaring her shoulders. She would not let this defeat her. The next morning, after a night's rest, and a hearty breakfast that Mrs. Peterson insisted she eat despite her diminished appetite, Rebecca heard a knock at the boarding house door. She had dressed in her second-best dress, a practical blue cotton with minimal lace, and pinned her auburn hair in a simple but neat style. If she was to find work, she needed to look presentable but not frivolous. Mrs. Peterson led Sheriff Quinn into the parlor where Rebecca waited. In the daylight, she could better observe the man who had come to her aid. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of physical work despite his position as sheriff. His dark hair was cut neatly, and the stubble of yesterday had been shaved clean. He was handsome in a rugged way, though Rebecca quickly chastised herself for noticing. "Miss Dalton," he greeted her with a polite nod, "I hope you're feeling better this morning." "Much, thank you." She gestured for him to sit. "Mrs. Peterson has been very kind." "She's good that way," he agreed as he took a seat across from her. "I've been thinking about your situation. The school might need a teacher's assistant, or there's Mrs. Abernathy at the dress shop who was looking for help." Rebecca sat a bit straighter. "I was a teacher's assistant in Boston." "I have experience." Sheriff Quinn smiled. "That's fortunate. I can introduce you to Mr. Foster, the schoolmaster, today if you'd like." "I would appreciate that very much." Mrs. Peterson appeared with coffee, then discreetly withdrew, though Rebecca suspected she wasn't far. "May I ask a personal question, Sheriff Adam?" he corrected gently. "And yes, you may." "Adam," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "You mentioned I wasn't the first abandoned bride to arrive in Santa Fe. It seems an unusual problem for a town to have." A shadow crossed his face. "There's a man, Josiah Blackwell, who runs advertisements in Eastern papers. He collects fees from women seeking husbands and from men supposedly seeking wives. Sometimes the men are real but change their minds. Sometimes they don't exist at all. We've been trying to catch him for years, but he moves his operation from territory to territory." He paused. Was your arrangement through Blackwell's marriage bureau by any chance? Rebecca nodded slowly. It was. She felt foolish now for not being more cautious, but she had been desperate after her parents' deaths. Then I suspect your Mr. Vance either never intended to marry or was paid to withdraw his offer. Adam's jaw tightened. Blackwell's been known to do both. But why? Surely the fees can't be worth the trouble. It's not just the fees. He sells information about the women when they're arriving, what they look like, how much money they're carrying. Makes it easy for his associates to rob them or worse. Rebecca felt cold despite the warm room. I see. I don't mean to frighten you, Adam said quickly. Santa Fe is generally safe, especially now that you're aware of the situation. I just want you to understand why we have protocols in place for women who arrive as you did. She appreciated his honesty, even as it made her realize how naive she had been. Thank you for telling me, and for helping me yesterday. He smiled again, that gentle expression that seemed at odds with his otherwise stern demeanor. It's my job to look after the people in this town. Even those who just arrived, especially those, he said firmly. They finished their coffee, and Adam escorted Rebecca to the schoolhouse, a modest building at the edge of town. Mr. Foster, a thin man with spectacles and a serious expression, listened to Rebecca's qualifications with interest. We're short-handed with the new term starting next month, he admitted. Miss Johnson left us to get married, and I haven't found a suitable replacement. Can you start Monday? Rebecca couldn't believe her luck. Yes, absolutely. The pay is $30 a month, not lavish, but it includes lunch at the school. It was less than she'd made in Boston, but the cost of living was surely lower here. That's acceptable, Mr. Foster. Thank you for the opportunity. As they left the schoolhouse, Rebecca felt a weight lift from her shoulders. I can't thank you enough, Sheriff Adam. You've saved me from what could have been a dreadful situation. You'd have managed, he said with conviction. You strike me as a resourceful woman, Miss Dalton. Rebecca, she offered, and perhaps but your kindness made it considerably easier. He tipped his hat. Just doing what anyone would. No, she said firmly, not just anyone would stop for a woman crying by the tracks. Something passed between them then, a moment of understanding that left Rebecca feeling slightly breathless. Adam cleared his throat. Well, I should get back to my duties. Will you be all right finding your way back to Mrs. Peterson's? I will, thank you. He hesitated, then added, There's a social at the church on Saturday evening. Might be a good way for you to meet some of the townspeople before school starts. I'll consider it, Rebecca replied, though she wasn't sure if she was ready for socializing. Good day, then, Rebecca. He touched the brim of his hat and turned to leave. Good day, Adam, she called after him, watching his retreating figure and wondering why the simple act of using his given name made her feel so bold. The following days passed in a blur as Rebecca settled into life in Santa Fe. She arranged to rent a small room at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house on a monthly basis. The rate mercifully reduced due to what Mrs. Peterson called special circumstances. She purchased a few necessities at the general store, carefully budgeting her remaining funds until her first paycheck would arrive. Saturday evening found her standing outside the church, nervously smoothing the skirt of her best dress, a deep green that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. She'd nearly decided not to come, but Mrs. Peterson had insisted it would be good for her to meet people. You can't hide away forever, dear, she'd said firmly. Besides, the sheriff will be disappointed if you don't show. Rebecca had blushed at that, which made Mrs. Peterson chuckle knowingly. She tried to protest that there was nothing between her and the sheriff, but the older woman had simply patted her hand and said, Not yet, perhaps. Now, taking a deep breath, Rebecca stepped into the church hall. Lanterns cast a warm glow over tables laden with food, and a small band played in the corner. People of all ages mingled, their conversation and laughter creating a cheerful atmosphere. Rebecca hesitated just inside the doorway, feeling out of place until Pastor Thompson spotted her and hurried over. "Miss Dalton, welcome, welcome. We're so pleased you could join us." The pastor's wife, a kind-faced woman with graying hair, appeared at his side and immediately linked her arm through Rebecca's. "Come, let me introduce you to everyone," Mrs. Thompson said, leading her into the crowd. "We heard you'll be working at the school. The children will be lucky to have you." For the next hour, Rebecca was introduced to what seemed like the entire town. Everyone was welcoming, though she noticed several curious glances and whispered comments that stopped when she approached. News of her arrival and circumstances had clearly spread. She was just helping herself to punch when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You came." Rebecca turned to find Adam standing there, looking different out of his sheriff's uniform. He wore a clean white shirt, dark vest, and trousers, his hair neatly combed. "I did," she smiled. "Mrs. Peterson was quite insistent." "She usually gets her way," he chuckled. "Are you enjoying yourself?" "Everyone has been very kind," she said diplomatically. "But," he raised an eyebrow, Rebecca sighed, "but I can't help feeling like an object of curiosity, the abandoned bride." "I've heard the whispers." Adam frowned. "I'm sorry about that. Small towns and their gossip. It'll die down soon enough." "I hope so." She sipped her punch. "And how are you enjoying the evening, Sheriff?" "It's improved considerably in the last few minutes," he said with a smile that made her heartbeat quicken. Before she could respond, the band struck up a livelier tune, and couples began to move to the center of the room for a dance. Adam held out his hand. "Would you care to dance, Miss Dalton?" Rebecca hesitated. "I don't know the steps to these frontier dances." "I'll teach you," he promised. "It's not so different from your Eastern dances, just a bit less formal." She placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. "Very well, but I warn you, I may step on your toes." "I'll risk it," he grinned, leading her to the dance floor. The dance was indeed simpler than the formal waltzes and quadrilles Rebecca was accustomed to, but it was also more energetic. Adam proved to be a patient teacher and a capable dancer, guiding her through the steps with a firm but gentle hand at her waist. "You're a natural," he said as they circled with the other couples. "You're a flatterer," she returned, breathless from the dance and from his proximity. When the music ended, they joined the applause, and Rebecca realized she was genuinely smiling for the first time since arriving in Santa Fe. "Another?" Adam asked as the band prepared for the next song. "I think I need a moment to catch my breath," she admitted. "Perhaps some air." He offered his arm. "The church garden is lovely this time of year." They slipped outside where the evening air had cooled slightly. The garden was indeed pretty, with climbing roses and a small fountain. A few lanterns hung from tree branches, providing just enough light to see by without diminishing the stars overhead. "It's beautiful," Rebecca said, looking up at the vast expanse of stars, more visible here than they had ever been in Boston. "It is," Adam agreed, though when she glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the sky. Rebecca felt a blush rising to her cheeks and turned away slightly. "Tell me about yourself, Sheriff Quinn. How long have you been in Santa Fe?" "Born and raised here," he replied, leading her to a bench near the fountain. "My father was sheriff before me. He died 5 years ago. Heart gave out. I took over then." "I'm sorry about your father," he nodded in acknowledgement. "What about your family?" Rebecca's smile faded slightly. "Both my parents are gone now. My father was a professor at a small college in Massachusetts. My mother taught piano. They left considerable debts when they passed, which is partly why I—" She trailed off, not wanting to revisit the mail-order bride arrangement. Adam seemed to understand. And no siblings? No, just me. She traced a pattern on the bench with her fingertip. What about you? A sister, Abigail. She lives in Denver with her husband and children. He smiled fondly. She writes often, trying to convince me to find a wife before I turn into a confirmed bachelor. And how old might that be? Rebecca asked, curiosity getting the better of her. 32 next month, he admitted. Getting dangerously close to permanent bachelorhood, according to Abigail. Rebecca laughed. Well, at 24, I'm apparently already in danger of spinsterhood, if my Boston acquaintances are to be believed. Boston's loss is Santa Fe's gain, Adam said softly. The sincerity in his voice made Rebecca's heart flutter, and for a moment they sat in comfortable silence, the distant music from the church hall providing a gentle backdrop to the evening. We should probably return, Rebecca finally said, though reluctantly. People will talk. They'll talk anyway, Adam pointed out, but he stood and offered his hand to help her up. But you're right. Besides, Mrs. Peterson will be looking for you. As they walked back toward the church, Adam suddenly stopped. Rebecca, I know you've only been here a short time, and I understand if this is too forward, but would you allow me to call on you properly? Perhaps Sunday after church. Rebecca studied his face in the dim light, seeing earnestness and something else, a hint of vulnerability that touched her. I would like that, she said simply. His smile was worth any potential gossip their growing acquaintance might generate. The school term began the following Monday, and Rebecca found herself busy learning the curriculum and getting to know her students. Santa Fe's school was smaller than the one she'd worked at in Boston, with children of various ages all taught in the same room. It was challenging but rewarding work, and she quickly developed a rapport with the children. True to his word, Adam had called on her after church on Sunday, taking her for a walk around the town and showing her places she hadn't yet discovered, the best view of the mountains from a hilltop just outside town, a hidden grove of cottonwood trees where the air was always cooler, the bakery that made cream puffs on Wednesdays that sold out by noon. Their outings became a regular occurrence. Every Sunday after church, and occasionally on a weekday evening, Adam would arrive at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, always with his hat in his hands and a smile that seemed reserved just for Rebecca. They would walk or sometimes ride in his buggy to various spots around Santa Fe, talking about everything from books they'd read to their hopes for the future. September gave way to October, and the leaves began to change. The crisp air and golden landscape made Santa Fe even more beautiful, and Rebecca found herself falling in love not just with the town and her new life, but with the kind-hearted sheriff who had rescued her from despair that first day. Adam, too, seemed increasingly drawn to her. His hand would linger when he helped her into the buggy, his eyes would seek hers across the church congregation, and sometimes, when they walked side by side, their fingers would brush in a way that seemed both accidental and deliberate. Miss Dalton, are you listening? Mr. Foster's voice broke into her thoughts one afternoon as they discussed the upcoming spelling bee. I'm sorry, Mr. Foster. My mind wandered. You were saying about the third-grade students. The schoolmaster gave her a knowing look. I was saying they need extra practice with their geography. But perhaps you're too busy thinking about our sheriff to concentrate on maps. Rebecca felt her face grow warm. Mr. Foster, I assure you, he held up a hand, a rare smile softening his stern features. No need for assurances, Miss Dalton. The whole town has noticed how Sheriff Quinn looks at you, and if I may be so bold, how you look at him. Is it that obvious? She asked, mortified. Only to everyone with eyes, he chuckled. It's a welcome change. The sheriff has been alone too long. Rebecca didn't know how to respond to that, so she redirected the conversation to the spelling bee, but Mr. Foster's words stayed with her. Was it really so obvious to everyone? And if so, why hadn't Adam spoken of his feelings directly? She got her answer the following Sunday. They had ridden to the Cottonwood Grove for a picnic, a basket of Mrs. Peterson's fried chicken and apple pie between them on a blanket. The afternoon was perfect warm for late October, with just enough breeze to rustle the golden leaves above. "Rebecca," Adam said after they had eaten, his voice unusually serious, "there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes." He took a deep breath. "I received a telegram yesterday from the marshal in Albuquerque. They've arrested Josiah Blackwell." Whatever she had been expecting, it wasn't this. "The man who runs the marriage bureau scam," Adam nodded. "They want me to bring you to testify. Your experience could help ensure he's convicted this time." "Of course," she agreed immediately. "When would we leave?" "The trial starts next Monday." "We'd need to leave by Thursday." He hesitated. "It's a 2-day journey each way. We'd be gone at least a week." Rebecca understood the implication. A week of travel alone with the sheriff would certainly set tongues wagging, regardless of the legitimate purpose. "Mrs. Peterson could accompany us as a chaperone," she suggested. Adam smiled slightly. "I already asked her. She agreed, though she seemed to think it unnecessary." "Of course she did," Rebecca laughed. Mrs. Peterson had made no secret of her approval of Adam's attentions. "There's something else," Adam said, his expression growing serious again. He moved the picnic basket aside and shifted closer to her on the blanket. "I've been wanting to tell you something for weeks now, but I wanted to be sure. I didn't want you to think I was taking advantage of your situation when you first arrived." Rebecca's heart began to race. "And what is it you want to tell me?" He took her hand in his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I think I've been falling in love with you since I first saw you by those train tracks. It wasn't pity that made me stop that day, it was something else, something I can't quite explain. Like I was meant to be there at that exact moment." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. "Adam." "You don't have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I know it's soon, and after what happened with your previous arrangement, I understand if you're hesitant. But I wanted you to know before we make this journey together. My intentions are honorable, Rebecca. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like to court you properly." She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, seeing the vulnerability and hope in his eyes. "I don't need time," she said softly. "I've known for weeks how I feel about you. I was just waiting for you to speak first." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "And how do you feel?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, Adam Quinn," she said simply. "I never expected to find love when I came west, especially not after what happened. But you've shown me kindness and respect from the first moment, and somewhere along the way, my heart decided it belonged to you." Adam's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "May I kiss you, Rebecca Dalton?" She nodded, and he leaned forward, pressing his lips gently against hers. The kiss was sweet and tender, a promise of things to come rather than a demand for more. When they parted, Rebecca felt as though the world had shifted slightly on its axis, realigning everything around this new reality where she was loved and in love. "Well," Adam said, a bit breathlessly, "I suppose Mrs. Peterson really will be an unnecessary chaperone now." Rebecca laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "On the contrary, now she's absolutely essential." They returned to town hand in hand, their feelings no longer a secret from each other or anyone else. Mrs. Peterson took one look at them as they entered the boarding house and nodded approvingly. "About time," she said, bustling off to prepare dinner. The suspense was killing us all. The journey to Albuquerque began early Thursday morning, with Adam driving the rented carriage and Mrs. Peterson and Rebecca seated comfortably inside with their luggage. The older woman brought her knitting, and a seemingly endless supply of stories about Santa Fe's residents, keeping them entertained as the miles passed. They stopped for the night at a respectable inn along the route, where Adam secured adjoining rooms for the ladies and himself. Over dinner, he briefed Rebecca on what to expect at the trial. "The prosecutor will ask about your correspondence with Blackwell's agency and your arrival in Santa Fe," he explained. "It may be uncomfortable to recount in public, but your testimony could help prevent other women from being deceived." Rebecca nodded, determined. "I understand. I want to help." Mrs. Peterson patted her hand. "You're a brave girl. Many would rather forget such an embarrassing episode." "There's no shame in being deceived by a practiced criminal," Adam said firmly. "The shame is all his." They arrived in Albuquerque late Friday afternoon and checked into a hotel near the courthouse. The trial would begin Monday morning, giving them the weekend to rest and prepare. Adam introduced Rebecca to Marshal Davis, who would be the primary witness against Blackwell. "We've been after him for years," the marshal explained. "He's ruined lives across 3 territories. Your testimony will help establish his pattern of fraud." Sunday morning they attended the local church, and afterward Adam suggested a walk through the town square. Mrs. Peterson, complaining of a headache that Rebecca suspected was largely fictional, returned to the hotel, leaving them alone for the first time since their declarations in the Cottonwood Grove. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Adam asked as they strolled beneath the plaza's trees. "A little," Rebecca admitted. "Not about testifying, but about seeing him, the man who nearly ruined my life." Adam squeezed her hand. "Remember what I told you by the train tracks. No more waiting. Your life didn't end with that letter. It took a different path." "A better path," she smiled up at him. "I never would have met you otherwise." He stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Rebecca, I know this might seem rushed, but life out here has taught me not to wait when something is important." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I had this with me at the picnic, but lost my nerve at the last moment." Rebecca's heart pounded as he opened the box to reveal a delicate ring with a small sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I know we haven't known each other long, and I'll understand if you want more time, but I love you, Rebecca Dalton. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled her eyes as she looked from the ring to his earnest face. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Adam, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace, kissing her with more passion than their first kiss, but still with the same tenderness. People passing by smiled at the obvious display of affection, but Rebecca barely noticed, too caught up in the joy of the moment. "Mrs. Peterson is going to be insufferably pleased with herself," she laughed as they finally parted. "Let her," Adam grinned. "She deserves the satisfaction after all her matchmaking efforts." They returned to the hotel hand in hand, the ring glinting in the autumn sunlight, both eager to share their news with their self-appointed chaperone. The trial began the next morning with Rebecca seated in the front row beside Mrs. Peterson. Adam, as an officer of the law, would testify before her and sat with the marshal and prosecutor at a table facing the judge. Josiah Blackwell was brought in under guard, and Rebecca felt a chill as she saw the man responsible for her heartbreak. He was older than she had imagined, perhaps in his 50s, with thinning hair and cold, calculating eyes that surveyed the courtroom without a hint of remorse. The proceedings began with the prosecutor outlining the case against Blackwell: multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit robbery. Adam was called to testify about the pattern of abandoned brides arriving in Santa Fe and the evidence linking them to Blackwell's operation. When it was Rebecca's turn, she approached the witness stand with her head held high, determined not to show fear or shame. She recounted her correspondence with the agency, the fee she had paid, and her arrival in Santa Fe only to find her intended husband had married another. "And did you receive any warning that Mr. Vance was no longer available?" the prosecutor asked. "No, sir. I only learned of it when I arrived at the station." "And the letter you received, did it mention refunding your fee?" "It included $10, which was less than a quarter of what I had paid to the agency." The prosecutor nodded, satisfied. "Thank you, Miss Dalton. No further questions." Blackwell's lawyer, a slick-looking man with a practiced smile, approached next. "Miss Dalton, is it possible that Mr. Vance simply changed his mind? Men do, you know." Rebecca straightened. "Possible, yes. But according to Sheriff Quinn's investigation, Mr. Vance never existed. The address he provided in his letters belongs to an abandoned property." The lawyer looked momentarily flustered by her calm response. "But you can't prove that Mr. Blackwell knew this, can you?" "No, but I can prove he continued to collect fees for an agency that consistently failed to deliver on its promises." "That, sir, is fraud, whether he knew the specific details of each case or not." A murmur ran through the courtroom, and the judge called for order. The defense attorney had no further questions, and Rebecca was dismissed from the stand. As she returned to her seat, she caught Adam's eye and saw the pride shining there. The trial continued for 3 days, with multiple witnesses testifying to similar experiences across New Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado territories. On the 4th day, the jury returned after only 2 hours of deliberation with a verdict: guilty on all counts. 10 years, Adam told Rebecca and Mrs. Peterson as they left the courthouse. "It's not as much as he deserves, but it's something." "It's justice," Rebecca said, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "And perhaps it will prevent others from suffering the same fate." They departed for Santa Fe the next morning, the journey back filled with plans for their future. They decided on a December wedding, giving them time to prepare, but not so long that they would have to endure an extended engagement. "Christmas is my favorite time of year," Rebecca explained as they discussed dates, "and it would be wonderful to start the new year as husband and wife." Adam agreed readily. "We can use the house my father left me. It needs some work, but it's a good size for a family." The mention of family brought a blush to Rebecca's cheeks and a knowing chuckle from Mrs. Peterson, who pretended to be absorbed in her knitting. Their return to Santa Fe was met with congratulations and well wishes from the townspeople, who had apparently been betting on when the sheriff would finally propose. Mr. Foster graciously granted Rebecca time off for wedding preparations, and the ladies of the church immediately formed a committee to assist with the planning. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of activity. Rebecca, with Mrs. Peterson's help, sewed a wedding dress of cream-colored silk with lace trim. Adam worked on the house, repairing the roof and repainting the exterior with help from friends. They chose furniture together, blending Adam's existing pieces with new purchases that reflected Rebecca's taste. December arrived with a light dusting of snow, unusual for Santa Fe, but considered a good omen by the older residents. The church was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the Christmas season, creating a perfect setting for the wedding. On the morning of December 18, 1883, Rebecca stood in Mrs. Peterson's best guest room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her bore little resemblance to the distraught bride who had sat crying beside the train tracks just 4 months earlier. This woman had color in her cheeks, hope in her eyes, and a future stretching before her with the man she loved. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Peterson said, adjusting the simple veil attached to Rebecca's upswept hair. "Adam won't be able to take his eyes off you." "I'm nervous," Rebecca admitted. "Not about marrying Adam, but about everything being perfect." The older woman smiled knowingly. "The only perfect thing about a wedding is the love between the bride and groom. Everything else is just decoration." A knock at the door announced the arrival of Pastor Thompson's wife, who would escort Rebecca to the church. "It's time, dear. Are you ready?" Rebecca took a deep breath and nodded. "I've been ready since the day he found me by those tracks." The church was filled to capacity when Rebecca entered on Pastor Thompson's arm, having asked him to give her away in the absence of her father. Candles flickered along the aisle, and the assembled townspeople turned to watch her progress toward the altar where Adam waited. He stood tall and handsome in a new black suit, his face breaking into a smile of pure joy when he saw her. As she reached him and placed her hand in his, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with traditional vows that echoed through the hushed church. When Pastor Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Adam's kiss was both tender and passionate, bringing cheers and applause from their friends and neighbors. The celebration afterward at the town hall lasted well into the evening, with dancing, feasting, and toasts to the new couple. As the night drew to a close, Adam led Rebecca to a waiting carriage decorated with ribbons and bells. "Where are we going?" she asked, assuming they would be spending their first night as husband and wife in their newly renovated home. "It's a surprise," Adam smiled, helping her into the carriage. "A short honeymoon before Christmas." They traveled for about an hour, the moon lighting their way until they reached a small cabin nestled among pine trees. A light glowed in the window, and smoke curled from the chimney. "My friend Thomas owns this hunting cabin," Adam explained as he carried their bags inside. "He prepared it for us, fire laid, provisions stocked. We'll have complete privacy for 3 days before heading back for Christmas." The interior was rustic but comfortable, with a large fireplace, a small kitchen area, and a bedroom visible through an open door. Someone had decorated for the occasion, with evergreen sprigs tied with red ribbons placed around the room and a bottle of champagne chilling beside 2 glasses on the table. "It's perfect," Rebecca breathed, taking in the cozy scene. Adam set down their bags and took her in his arms. "You're perfect," he murmured against her hair. "I still can't believe you're my wife." "Believe it," she smiled up at him. "I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her then, all the restraint of the past months giving way to passion that had been building between them. Rebecca responded eagerly, her arms twining around his neck as she pressed herself closer to him. Later, as they lay together in the cabin's bed, the fire casting a warm glow over their entwined figures, Adam traced lazy patterns on Rebecca's bare shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, resting her head on his chest to hear the steady beating of his heart. "Do you know, when I was sitting by those tracks crying, I thought my life was over. I had no idea it was just beginning." Adam pulled her closer. "I thank God every day that I was the one to find you." "No more waiting," Rebecca whispered, echoing his words from that first day. "No more waiting," he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. They returned to Santa Fe on Christmas Eve to attend the church service and spend the holiday with their friends. Their home, decorated with greens and candles, became the center of festivities as they hosted dinner for Mrs. Peterson, Pastor and Mrs. Thompson, and several others who had been instrumental in bringing them together. Winter turned to spring, and with the changing season came news that delighted the entire town. The sheriff and his bride were expecting their first child. Rebecca continued teaching until the end of the school term in May, by which time her condition was becoming visible beneath her carefully altered dresses. Their son, Daniel James Quinn, was born on a warm September evening in 1884, exactly 1 year after Adam had proposed in Albuquerque. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and from the moment he entered the world, he was the center of their universe. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm. Adam continued as sheriff, earning a reputation for fairness and integrity throughout the territory. Rebecca, after taking time to care for their son, returned to teaching part-time when Daniel was a toddler, sharing the position with another young mother. Their home grew lively with the addition of a daughter, Elizabeth Grace, in 1886, and another son, Michael Thomas, in 1889. The Quinn children filled the once quiet house with laughter, arguments, and the everyday chaos of family life. Through it all, Rebecca and Adam's love deepened, tempered by the challenges and joys of their shared life. They never forgot how they met or the circumstances that brought them together. But the memory became a source of gratitude rather than pain, a reminder of how an ending had become their beginning. On a summer evening in 1893, 10 years after they first met, Adam and Rebecca sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over Santa Fe. Daniel, nearly 9, was teaching 6-year-old Michael how to throw a lasso, while Elizabeth, at 7, supervised with all the authority of a middle child. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't found me that day?" Rebecca asked, her head resting on Adam's shoulder. He was silent for a moment, his arm tightening around her. "Sometimes. But then I remember something my father used to say, that the important moments in life are never accidents." Rebecca smiled, watching as Daniel successfully helped Michael loop the rope around a fence post, prompting cheers from all 3 children. "I think your father was right." Adam turned to face her, the love of a decade reflected in his eyes. "No more waiting," he said softly, the words that had become both a memory and a promise between them. Rebecca leaned forward to kiss him, her heart full. "No more waiting," she agreed. Behind them, the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, a fitting backdrop to a love story that had begun with tears beside train tracks and blossomed into a life neither of them could have imagined on that fateful summer day in Santa Fe.